The objective today is to decide what images constitute copyright violation. So, a lot of times when we study things, we do it just in theory. Today should give you a good grounding and some solid examples to connect to in order to understand copyright better. So, talking about the law is tough. Different judges decide differently across all of America. Maybe a website or software can help solve some of these issues we see with this, but as of now, there's not some sort of huge piece of software I know of that can connect judges and help them make more consistent decisions. So basically what I'm saying is if you're in California and you have a copyright case, that may be judged very differently than, say, a certain county in Texas, which I know about, in terms of if you prosecute in that county in Texas, your chances of winning are just 10 times more likely. So that's a strange thing about the American legal system. Clearly, my expertise is not the legal system, it's more technology, but I would do my best today. What we've not started doing in class, we have not done any massive collaborating yet, so that will really throw a wrench in our gears when we start thinking about copyright. If you're working with a team of people and only one member is violating copyright, should the whole team be punished? What we do have in progress is we're learning more and more about GitHub and Git in general. What we have completed is the idea of making a commit in Git. So here is a story for you to wrap your mind around. My wife and I sat cross-legged on the floor of a local Barnes & Noble store recently, surrounded by several large piles of books. We were searching for interior design ideas for a new home that we were planning to buy. As we lobbed the books back and forth, sharing kitchen layouts and hardwood floor textures, we snapped a dozen pictures of book pages with our iPhones. We wanted to share them later with our contractor. Later that evening, I felt a few pangs of guilt. I asked my wife, did we do anything wrong? And I wondered, had we broken any laws by photographing those pages? Think right, share. What do you think? I asked Julie A. Ahrens, Associate Director of the Fair Use Project at the Stanford Law School. The core issue here is that you're creating a copy of something rather than buying it, she said. Is it morally incorrect? Maybe, but it entirely depends on how much of the book you copy and what you do with that copy. That would determine if it was illegal. These kinds of questions aren't entirely new, of course. Consider the heyday of the photocopier in the 1960s and early 70s. After the Xerox copying machine was introduced into offices in 1959, it quickly found its way into libraries. The price of copies dropped and people began to photocopy books and journals in large numbers. Many students discovered that it was cheaper to photocopy a friend's textbook or a copy of his copy than to buy the book. By the 1970s, the publishing industry saw the copier as the enemy, and publishers began to file lawsuits, prefiguring by several decades the music industry's suits against those who would download free music over the internet. So a classic case of studying history for the sake of learning from our mistakes, right? Something very similar happened in the 1970s that we can look at in order to better proceed into the future here. Your Think Right shares, do you imagine many of the copyright worries we have today will disappear just like this one did? Time magazine covered this earlier era of copyright confusion. The photocopier's opponents said the technology enabled theft and stifled creativity and punched holes in the copyright laws. After endless legal battles, the publishing industry succeeded in persuading Congress to pass the Copyright Act of 1976. Do you remember the name of the Copyright Act we had just finished talking about yesterday? So the Copyright Act of 1976 defined fair use of copyrighted materials and sought to establish a set of rules for ownership of content. It allowed limited replication of snippets of music, video, and text, and it gave teachers the right to photocopy certain materials without having to pay hefty fees to publishers. And this word snippet is in red because every day we start class by copying a snippet of code. So there should be nothing wrong with us copying these snippets of code. We're not copying entire files of code. If we were to do that, then sure, we can be getting closer to violating copyright, depending on what we did with it, of course. So continuing on here, that worked well enough for a while, but it didn't take long before new technologies came along. The internet and other digital tools like file sharing enabled new forms of duplication and set off new copyright disputes. Need I worry yet that a phalanx of lawyers will soon grab me between the home decor and New Age aisles at Barnes & Noble? Mr. Nesson says the question is unanswerable for now. The music industry, he says, has a strategy of going after individuals while not addressing changing technologies as they apply to the copyright law. The publishing industry could well do the same, he adds. I think the law and the draconian action of copyright holders will stay this way for a long time. There's change in the air, but it's not a change that's going to come very quickly. So think, Rayshare, do you agree with the music industry's tactic to just go after individuals rather than the technology, that's to say even websites themselves? Indeed, it could be years before the publishing industry feels real economic pressure caused by people who take pictures of books or magazines with their mobile phones. In fact, it's quite possible that digital technology will make this particular problem moot. As Miss Aaron says, by the time this becomes an issue, we might not even have bookstores anymore. Think right, Cher. How many times a year do you visit a bookstore? We might already be pretty close there to a society without bookstores. So this story I told you came from a New York Times article. Here's the link. It was called "Can Your Camera Phone Turn You Into a Pirate?" Great article. I just chose the best pieces from it so I can give you a solid example of the things we're talking about in this unit in terms of copyright and copyright law. Supporters of strong intellectual property enforcement, such as those behind the proposed new Stop Online Piracy Act, also known as SOPA, and Protect IP Act, PIPA, bills in Congress, argue that online piracy is a huge problem, one which costs the U.S. economy between $200 and $250 billion a year. And this is also responsible for the loss of 750,000 American jobs. The good news is that these numbers are wrong, as this post by the Cato Institute's Julian Sanchez explains. In 2010, the Government Accountability Office released a report noting that these figures cannot be substantiated or traced back to an underlying data source or methodology, which is polite government speak for these figures were completely made up out of thin air. So always be careful when you're looking at numbers, looking at data. Just always think to yourself, what's the reason this person is showing me the number? What is the thing that they are trying to get out of it? And this act, Stop Online Piracy Act, this is talked about often in the news nowadays. Most of the time, though, you'll hear it being referred to as the name SOPA. So the information I just read to you here came from Freakonomics website, one of my favorites, and a really good book if you haven't read it. So if I just told you those numbers are made up, here's your think right share, okay? What numbers would be high enough before you agree to stop pirating or encourage others to stop? You Can Click But You Can't Hide is a publicity campaign run jointly by several international associations, most notably the MPA, the MPAA, and the GVU, as part of the larger Respect Copyrights campaign against peer-to-peer file sharing or motion pictures. The associations have long alleged that internet file sharing or maintaining a file sharing tracker, network, or search engine constitutes copyright infringement because the practice hurts their profits. So even if your website simply directed someone to another website where copyright is being violated, you can get in trouble for that. The phrase is an adaptation of the phrase, "You can run but you can't hide," a statement attributed to American boxer Joe Louis. The illegal downloading inappropriate for all ages campaign logo is based on the MPA rating system logos, and you've probably seen this before. Here's your challenge, Think Right Share. What would be the most effective way to stop illegal downloads? My computer doesn't work. The hard drive crashed. What do I do? Did you back up? Why is it going to blow? So this is a great comic strip showing the importance of backing up your files. And the reason I'm showing the comic strip is sometimes when you go to these pirating websites, if you download a bootleg copy of a movie in theaters you want to see, or if you're even streaming things, that can do damage to your computer. Pirate Bay, a very popular website for illegal downloads, just got caught borrowing their users' CPUs. So when you go to the website, that website takes control of your computer in a certain way. All it does is it uses your processor to mine bitcoins. So that's a very expensive and difficult process to do, mining bitcoins. Of course, if it wasn't difficult, everybody would do it. So this website, they're getting money by the machines of people who are visiting the website. So when you do participate in these things that are not totally ethical or not totally legal, you need to be prepared for damage that might come to your computer. All right, so we have our 7 IB questions of the day here. Go ahead and just choose one to answer, reflecting on the lesson. And your DOL, I want you to take a stance here. Do you think taking a picture of another picture is a violation of copyright? Why or why not?